Mother, saying no to family events that cause you stress, refusing to manage her emotions, asking her to respect your marriage. What comes up for you? The panic was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah felt her chest tighten, her breath becoming shallow. The idea of disappointing Margaret, of causing her pain, of being the target of her tears and accusations, felt impossible to bear. "I can't," Sarah gasped. "I can't do that to her. She's been through so much. She lost Dad. She raised us alone. She's getting older. I'm all she has." "What about what you've been through? What about what you've lost?" The question stopped Sarah cold. What had she lost? Her marriage was falling apart, yes, but that felt like her fault, her failure. Her relationship with Meredith was non-existent, but Meredith was the one who'd chosen to leave. Her friendships were surface level at best, but that was just the natural progression of adult life, wasn't it? "I don't know," Sarah whispered. "I think you do know. I think you're afraid to let yourself know." Sarah closed her eyes, and for a moment she allowed herself to really feel the weight of what she'd sacrificed over the years. The spontaneity she'd given up to be constantly available for Margaret's crises, the depth of relationship she'd never developed because she'd learned to keep herself small and accommodating, the dreams she'd deferred, the boundaries she'd never learned to set, the fundamental sense of self she'd never been allowed to develop. "I lost myself," she said quietly. "I lost myself so completely that I don't even know who I am anymore." The admission felt like standing naked in a snowstorm, terrifying and essential at the same time. Sarah opened her eyes and looked at Dr. Rivera, who was watching her with the kind of steady presence that Sarah realized she'd been craving her entire life. "The good news," Dr. Rivera said gently, "is that the self you lost is still there. It's just been buried under years of adaptive behaviors that helped you survive your childhood. But now those same behaviors are threatening your adult relationships and your mental health." How do I find her again? How do I find myself? It starts with learning to tolerate other people's disappointment in you, your mother's specifically. Dr. Rivera pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. "I'm going to give you some homework. I want you to practice saying no to one small request from your mother this week. Nothing major. Maybe she asks you to run an errand or wants you to call her back immediately when you're busy. Just one small no." Sarah took the paper with trembling hands. The task felt monumental, impossible. What if she gets upset? She probably will get upset, and you'll survive it. More importantly, you'll learn that you can survive disappointing someone you love without the world ending. As Sarah left the office, she felt lighter and heavier at the same time. The afternoon sun seemed brighter, the air cleaner, as if she'd been breathing through a filter she hadn't realized was there. But she also felt the weight of the work ahead of her, the difficulty of unlearning patterns that had been decades in the making. Her phone buzzed as she reached her car. A text from Margaret. "Sweetheart, I'm at the grocery store and I can't remember. Do you and David prefer the pine nuts or the walnuts in the salad for Christmas dinner? Call me when you get a chance. Love you." Sarah stared at the message, her heart rate increasing. The old Sarah would have called immediately, would have spent 10 minutes discussing salad ingredients while Margaret subtly probed for information about Christmas plans, would have left the conversation feeling drained but dutiful. Instead, Sarah put her phone away and drove home. She could call her mother later or tomorrow. The salad nuts were not an emergency, despite how Margaret had framed the question.
It was a small act of rebellion, but as Sarah pulled into her driveway, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The quiet satisfaction of choosing herself, even in the smallest of ways. The missed call notifications had multiplied like bacteria overnight. Sarah woke to 17 missed calls from Margaret, 12 text messages ranging from concerned, "Darling, are you all right? You didn't call me back about the nuts," to frantic, "Sarah, I'm worried sick. Please call me immediately," to manipulative, "I suppose you're too busy with your new life to care about your old mother." Sarah sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing the oversized t-shirt she'd slept in, and felt the familiar knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. It had been exactly 18 hours since she'd received her mother's text about the salad ingredients. 18 hours since she'd made the radical choice not to respond immediately. Her phone rang in her hand, Margaret's photo appearing on the screen. A picture from last Christmas where her mother was smiling, but her eyes looked tired, older than her 67 years. Sarah's finger hovered over the answer button, muscle memory almost overriding her conscious decision to wait. She let it go to voicemail. Within minutes, another text appeared. Sarah Elizabeth Chen Martinez, I am getting in my car right now and driving over there. If something has happened to you, I will never forgive myself. The use of her full name, the threat of an unannounced visit, and the implication that Sarah's silence was somehow putting Margaret at risk of unbearable guilt. It was textbook emotional manipulation, and for the first time in her adult life, Sarah could see it clearly. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Lisa. Sarah, what the hell is going on? Lisa's voice was breathless, anxious. Mom called me at 6 this morning crying about how you've disappeared and she's afraid you're having a breakdown or that David has forbidden you from talking to the family. She wants me to do a welfare check on you. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the familiar family crisis machinery grinding to life around her. This was how it always worked. Margaret's distress became everyone's emergency, and Sarah found herself in the center of a drama she hadn't even known she was creating. I'm fine, Lisa. I just didn't call Mom back about salad nuts last night. Salad nuts? Lisa's voice went flat. She's having a complete meltdown over salad nuts? Apparently. Sarah, how often does Mom call you when she can't reach me immediately? There was a long pause. More than I'd like to admit. But Sarah, you always call her back right away. It's not like you to just not respond. Maybe that's the problem. Another pause. Longer this time. Are you and David okay? Mom mentioned something about you two having issues. Sarah's grip tightened on her coffee mug. Of course, Margaret had shared their private struggles with Lisa, probably framing herself as the concerned mother trying to save her daughter's marriage. We're working through some things. Does this have to do with the therapy Rachel mentioned? She said you were seeing someone. The tentacles of information sharing in her family never ceased to amaze Sarah. Her conversation with Rachel about finding a therapist somehow made its way back to Lisa, and probably to Margaret as well. There were no secrets in the Chen family, except for the ones that mattered most, like the fact that their family dynamics were profoundly dysfunctional.
Lisa, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer, Sarah said, settling onto her couch with her coffee. When was the last time you told Mom no about something? Really said no and stuck to it. The silence stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Lisa spoke, her voice small. I can't remember. Neither can I, and I'm 34 years old. Sarah, what are you saying? Before Sarah could answer, her doorbell rang. Through the front window, she could see Margaret's silver Honda Accord in her driveway and her mother's silhouette at the door. She's here, Sarah told Lisa. I have to go. Sarah, wait! Sarah hung up and stared at her front door. This was it, the moment Dr. Rivera had prepared her for, the escalation that would inevitably come when she tried to change the rules of engagement that had governed her relationship with her mother for decades. The doorbell rang again, followed by sharp knocking. Sarah, open this door right now! Margaret's voice carried through the wood, high-pitched with distress and authority. I know you're in there. Your car is in the driveway. Sarah set down her coffee and walked slowly to the door. She could see her mother through the peephole. Margaret was wearing her good coat, the navy one she reserved for important occasions, and her makeup was perfect despite the early hour. Her hair was styled, her posture erect. She looked like a woman prepared for battle, not like someone who'd spent the night worried sick about her daughter's well-being. Mom, I'm fine,
Sarah called through the door. "I just needed some space." "Space? From your own mother?" Margaret's voice cracked with hurt. "Sarah, open this door. We need to talk." "I'm not ready to talk right now." The silence that followed was deafening. I could almost hear my mother processing this unprecedented refusal, recalibrating her approach. "Sarah Elizabeth, I am your mother. I changed your diapers. I stayed up with you when you had pneumonia. I sacrificed everything to raise you girls after your father died. You do not get to shut me out like this." There it was, the nuclear option, the invocation of maternal sacrifice, the reminder of childhood dependency, the implication that Sarah's boundaries were a betrayal of everything Margaret had given up for her children. Sarah felt her resolve wavering, the old programming kicking in. Good daughters didn't lock their mothers out. Good daughters didn't cause this kind of pain. Good daughters prioritized their mother's feelings over their own needs. But then she thought about David's face that morning, in the kitchen, the way he'd looked at her with such profound sadness. She thought about Dr. Rivera's gentle but firm voice. "You can survive disappointing someone you love without the world ending." "Mom, I love you, but I need some time to myself. I'll call you tomorrow." "Tomorrow? Sarah, what has gotten into you? Is this David? Has he been filling your head with ideas about your family? Because if he's trying to turn you against me..." "This isn't about David. This is about me needing some space." "Space from what? From love? From family? From the woman who gave you life?" Margaret was crying now, her sobs audible through the door. "Sarah, I have been worried sick. I thought something terrible had happened to you. Do you know what it feels like to think your child might be hurt, might be in danger?" The guilt hit Sarah like a physical blow. This was the crux of it, the core manipulation that had controlled her for decades. The idea that her independence, her boundaries, her separate selfhood were somehow a form of cruelty to her mother. That by not being immediately available, she was inflicting unbearable suffering on the woman who had given her life. Sarah leaned her forehead against the door, feeling the weight of 34 years of conditioning pressing down on her shoulders. Every instinct screamed at her to open the door, to comfort her crying mother, to return to the familiar dance of emotional caretaking that had defined their relationship since childhood. Instead, she spoke quietly. "Mom, I'm okay. I'm safe. I just need some time to think. I'll call you tomorrow, I promise." "Time to think about what?" Margaret's voice was raw now, desperate. "About abandoning your family? About choosing that man over your own blood? Sarah, he's poison. Can't you see what he's done to you? He's isolated you from everyone who loves you." The accusation about David sparked something hot and protective in Sarah's chest. "David has never said a word against you, Mom. Not once. Even when..." She stopped herself, but Margaret pounced on the opening. "Even when what? What lies has he been telling you?" "He hasn't told me anything. I figured it out myself. I figured out that every time I try to build something of my own, my marriage, my career, my friendships, somehow it always becomes about managing your feelings instead." "That is not true." Margaret's voice had gone cold now, the tears stopping as abruptly as they'd started. "I have supported every decision you've ever made. I have been nothing but loving and encouraging. You cried when I chose architecture over pre-med. I was worried about your future. You gave a speech at my wedding reception about how I've always been impulsive. I was trying to be funny, to celebrate your personality. You called me 17 times last night because I didn't respond to a text about salad ingredients. I was concerned about your well-being." Sarah marveled at how quickly Margaret could reframe every controlling behavior as an act of love, every boundary violation as maternal concern. It was like watching a masterclass in emotional manipulation, and Sarah wondered how she'd never seen it clearly before. Mom, do you remember when I was 12 and I wanted to go to Emma Johnson's sleepover party? A pause. What does that have to do with anything? You said you weren't feeling well that night. You said you might need to go to the emergency room, and you couldn't bear the thought of being alone if something happened. So I stayed home. I was genuinely unwell. And when I was 16 and got invited to prom by Jake Morrison, you were too young for such things. You said the dress I wanted was too expensive, that we couldn't afford it because you'd just been to the doctor for chest pains that turned out to be anxiety. So I didn't go. I was protecting you from making choices you'd regret.
And when I was 22 and got offered that internship in San Francisco? This pause was longer. Sarah could hear her mother's breathing through the door, could almost feel her searching for the right justification. You weren't ready to be so far from home. I was ready, Mom. I wanted to go. But you said it would break your heart if I moved so far away, that you'd already lost Dad and you couldn't lose me too. So I stayed. And you got a wonderful job here instead. You met David here. Everything worked out. Sarah closed her eyes, seeing the pattern with crystal clarity for the first time. Every major decision in her life had been filtered through Margaret's needs, her fears, her definition of what was best for Sarah. And somehow, Margaret had managed to convince them both that this was love. Mom, I need you to leave now. Sarah, you're making a terrible mistake. You're throwing away your family for a man who will eventually leave you, and then you'll have nothing. No family, no support, no one who really loves you. The prophecy was delivered with such conviction that Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was Margaret's deepest fear made manifest, that Sarah would choose independence and end up alone. But it was also Margaret's weapon, the threat that had kept Sarah tethered to her for decades. Maybe that's a risk I need to take. You'll regret this for the rest of your life. Maybe, but it will be my regret to live with. Sarah heard footsteps retreating from her door, then the slam of a car door and the angry rev of an engine. She waited until she heard Margaret's car pull out of the driveway before collapsing onto her couch, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and something that might have been relief. Her phone buzzed immediately, a text from Margaret. I hope you're happy. You've broken your mother's heart. Don't expect me to be here when you come crawling back. Then another. I'm calling Lisa and telling her what you've done. Maybe she still cares about family. And another. Your father would be ashamed of the woman you've become. Sarah stared at the messages, feeling something cold and final settling in her chest. The invocation of her dead father, the threat to turn Lisa against her, the accusation that she'd broken her mother's heart by asking for a single day of space, it was all so predictable, so perfectly choreographed that Sarah almost laughed. Her phone rang. Lisa again. Sarah, Mom just called me hysterical. She says you locked her out of your house and told her you never want to see her again. She says David has brainwashed you and you're having some kind of breakdown. What the hell is going on? I took a deep breath. Mom asked me for some space, and she drove over here uninvited and demanded I let her in. When I said I needed time to think, she accused David of turning me against the family and told me I'd regret choosing my marriage over my blood relatives. She said you were cruel to her, that you acted like she was a stranger. Lisa, I spoke to her through the door for 10 minutes. I told her I loved her, but needed space. I promised I'd call her tomorrow. How is that cruel?
Another long pause. It's not, Lisa said quietly. But Sarah, you know how she gets when she feels rejected. She's probably at home right now working herself into a complete state. And whose job is it to manage that state? What do you mean? I mean, who is responsible for Mom's emotional reactions? Who has to drop everything when she gets upset? Who has to sacrifice their own needs to keep her calm? Well, we all do. She's our mother. Is she Meredith's mother? The question hung in the air between them. Meredith, who had moved to Portland 5 years ago and changed her phone number. Meredith, who sent generic Christmas cards with no return address. Meredith, who had chosen complete estrangement over the endless cycle of emotional management that defined the Chin family dynamics. "That's different," Lisa said finally. "Meredith went too far." "Did she? Or did she just go further than we'd been brave enough to go?" "Sarah, you're scaring me. You sound like you're planning to cut Mom off completely." "I'm not planning anything right now except taking some time to figure out who I am when I'm not managing everyone else's feelings." Sarah's voice was steadier now, more confident. "Lisa, when was the last time you made a decision based purely on what you wanted, without considering how it would affect Mom's emotional state?" The silence stretched so long that Sarah checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. "I can't remember," finally. "Neither could I until yesterday. And I'm 34 years old, Lisa. I'm a grown woman with a career and a marriage, and I've never learned how to say no to my own mother." "But she loves us." "I know she does. But love isn't supposed to feel like drowning." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the silence of her house and tried to remember what it felt like to breathe without constantly monitoring someone else's emotional temperature. The sensation was foreign, almost dizzying, like stepping off a treadmill after running for hours. Her phone buzzed with another text, this time from David. "Marcus told me your mom showed up at his place looking for me. She told him I was destroying our family and asked him to talk sense into me. Just wanted to give you a heads up." She stared at the message, feeling a new kind of anger rise in her chest. Margaret had now involved David's best friend in our family drama, had shown up at Marcus's house to plead her case and paint David as the villain in their story. The reach of Margaret's manipulation was expanding, drawing more people into the orbit of her distress. She called David without hesitation. "Hey." His voice was cautious, careful. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry she dragged Marcus into this. I'm sorry she's trying to make you the villain, and I'm sorry it took me this long to see what was really happening." "Sarah," David's voice softened. "Are you okay? Marcus said she seemed pretty upset." "She is upset. I asked her for space, and apparently that's the equivalent of abandoning her to die alone." Sarah found herself laughing, a sound that felt rusty and strange. "David, I think I'm finally starting to understand what you meant by feeling like you were married to a ghost." "What do you mean?"
I mean, I've been so busy managing my mother's emotions that I forgot I was allowed to have my own. I've been so afraid of disappointing her that I lost track of what I actually wanted, what I actually believed, who I actually was." David was quiet for a moment. "What changed?" "I saw a therapist, and for the first time in my life, someone asked me what I had lost instead of what I owed." Sarah's voice cracked slightly. "I lost myself, David. I lost myself so completely that I didn't even know it was gone." "Where are you now? I mean, where are you in all this?" Sarah looked around her living room, taking in the space she and David had created together. The photographs from their travels, the books they'd collected, the couch where they'd spent countless evenings talking about their dreams and fears. It was a life they'd built together, and she'd almost let her mother's needs tear it apart. "I'm here," she said simply. "I'm finally here." "I'd like to come home," David said quietly, "if that's okay with you." "I'd like that too. But David, this isn't going to be easy. Mom's not going to just accept that things have changed. She's going to escalate, and it's going to get worse before it gets better." "I know, but Sarah, I married you, not your mother, not your family dysfunction. You. And if you're willing to fight for yourself, then I'm willing to fight for us." After they hung up, Sarah sat in the growing afternoon light and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate, anxious hope that came from trying to keep everyone happy, but the quiet, steady hope that came from finally choosing herself. Her phone buzzed with yet another text from Margaret. "I've called Dr. Peterson about my heart. He says the stress of this situation could trigger another episode. I hope you can live with yourself if something happens to me." Sarah looked at the message and felt nothing. No panic, no guilt, no overwhelming urge to fix her mother's distress. Just a clear-eyed recognition of emotional manipulation for what it was. She deleted the message without responding and went to make herself lunch, choosing what she wanted to eat without considering anyone else's preferences for the first time in longer than she could remember.
It was a small act of rebellion, but it felt revolutionary. But the peace didn't last long. Over the next week, Margaret launched what could only be described as a full-scale emotional warfare campaign. She called Sarah's workplace, telling the receptionist she was worried about her daughter's mental health and needed to speak with her immediately. She contacted old family friends, spinning a narrative about how David had isolated Sarah from her loving family. She even reached out to Sarah's college roommate, Jennifer, who called Sarah in confusion. "Your mom found me on Facebook," Jennifer said, her voice bewildered. "She said you were in an abusive relationship and needed intervention. Sarah, what's going on?" Sarah sat in her office during lunch break, looking out at the city skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The architectural firm where she worked occupied the 20th floor of a downtown building, and from her desk she could see the geometric patterns of urban planning spread out below her like a blueprint of human ambition. "My mom doesn't understand boundaries," Sarah said carefully. "I asked for some space, and she's interpreting that as a crisis that requires her to mobilize everyone we've ever known." "She seemed really upset. She kept saying you'd been brainwashed." "By who? My husband of 8 years? The therapist I've seen 3 times? The revolutionary idea that I might be allowed to have my own feelings?" Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, I've known you since we were 18. You've always been careful around your mom. Is this about more than just needing space?"
The question opened a door that Sarah wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. Jennifer had been her roommate during the years when Sarah was learning to navigate adulthood while still managing Margaret's long-distance emotional needs. She'd witnessed the daily phone calls, the careful negotiations around holiday visits, the way Sarah would drop everything whenever Margaret called with a crisis. "Do you remember sophomore year when I almost transferred to state so I could be closer to home?" Sarah asked. "Yeah, your mom was having health issues, right? She was having anxiety attacks and calling them heart problems. She convinced herself she was dying and she needed me to come home and take care of her." Sarah paused, remembering the sleepless nights she'd spent trying to balance her coursework with her mother's escalating medical fears. "I was all set to transfer. I'd already submitted the application." "What changed your mind?" "You did, actually. You asked me why I was willing to give up my dreams to manage someone else's anxiety. It was the first time anyone had ever suggested that maybe my mom's problems weren't automatically my responsibility." "I remember that conversation. You looked like I'd suggested you abandon a puppy on the highway." Sarah laughed, but it was a hollow sound. "I felt like I was betraying her by even considering that her anxiety might not be my fault or my job to fix." "And now?" "Now I'm realizing that the betrayal was the other way around. She betrayed my childhood by making me responsible for her emotional well-being. She betrayed my independence by teaching me that love means sacrificing yourself to keep other people comfortable." After the call with Jennifer, Sarah found herself thinking about all the people Margaret had contacted in the past week. Her campaign wasn't random. She was systematically reaching out to anyone who might have influence over Sarah, anyone who might be persuaded to join her cause of saving Sarah from her own choices. That evening, David came home with groceries and a bottle of wine. He'd been back for 3 days now, and they were still navigating the delicate process of rebuilding trust while Sarah dealt with Margaret's escalating behavior. "Your Aunt Helen called me today," David said as he unpacked vegetables in the kitchen. Sarah's stomach clenched. "What did she say?" "She wanted to know if I was preventing you from seeing your family for the holidays. She said Margaret was beside herself with worry and that maybe we should all sit down and talk things through like adults." "Did you tell her that the reason I don't want to spend Christmas with Mom is because she turns every family gathering into a performance of her own victimhood?" "I told her that you and your mother were working through some communication issues and that it wasn't my place to speak for you." David set down a bag of apples and looked at Sarah seriously. "But I also told her that if she wanted to understand what was really going on, she should ask you directly instead of getting her information secondhand from Margaret." Sarah felt a warm flutter of gratitude in her chest. David's response was perfect.
respectful but firm, protective of her autonomy while refusing to be drawn into the family drama. "She probably won't call me," Sarah said. "It's easier to get the story from Mom and then try to fix it from a distance." That seems to be the family pattern. What do you mean?
David paused in his unpacking, choosing his words carefully. "I mean that everyone in your family seems to believe that Margaret's emotional state is everyone's responsibility except Margaret's. When she gets upset, the solution is never for her to manage her own feelings or change her behavior. The solution is always for everyone else to accommodate her needs and manage her emotions for her." Sarah nodded slowly. "And if we don't accommodate her, we're the ones being unreasonable." Exactly. It's like emotional hostage taking. Give me what I want, or I'll be devastated, and then everyone will know you're a terrible daughter. The phrase emotional hostage taking hit Sarah with the force of recognition. That's exactly what it felt like, being held captive by the threat of her mother's emotional collapse if Sarah ever prioritized her own needs. Dr. Rivera calls it emotional terrorism, Sarah said quietly. The use of emotional distress as a weapon to control other people's behavior. David winced. That's a harsh way to put it, but accurate. They cooked dinner together, falling into the familiar rhythm they'd developed over years of partnership. But underneath the normalcy, Sarah could feel the tension building. Margaret's campaign was escalating, and Sarah knew that her mother's next move would be even more dramatic. She was right. The next morning, Sarah woke to find Lisa sitting in her car in the driveway, engine running, talking animatedly on her phone. When Sarah opened the front door, Lisa hung up and got out of the car, her face pale and drawn. "We need to talk," Lisa said without preamble. "Good morning to you too," Sarah replied, but she stepped aside to let her sister in. Lisa declined offers of coffee or breakfast, pacing instead around Sarah's living room like a caged animal. "Mom tried to kill herself last night." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow, all the air leaving her lungs at once. "What?" "She took a bottle of sleeping pills. Aunt Helen found her this morning when she went over to check on her. She's at Presbyterian Hospital now, stable but sedated." Sarah sank onto her couch, her mind reeling. Is she going to be okay? Physically, yes. They pumped her stomach, and she's not in any danger now. Lisa stopped pacing and fixed Sarah with a look that was part grief, part accusation. "But Sarah, she left a note. It was addressed to you." "What did it say?" Lisa pulled a folded piece of paper from her purse, her hands shaking slightly. "I thought you should read it yourself." Sarah unfolded the paper, recognizing her mother's careful handwriting immediately. The words swam before her eyes as she read. "My dearest Sarah, by the time you read this, I'll be at peace. I can't live in a world where my own daughter hates me so much that she won't even speak to me. I know you think I'm manipulative and controlling, but everything I've ever done was out of love for you girls. I'm sorry I wasn't the perfect mother you needed. I'm sorry I was such a burden that you had to cut me out of your life to be happy. Please don't blame yourself for this. This is my choice, my way of setting you free from the mother who apparently caused you so much pain. Take care of yourself, sweetheart. Be happy with David. Maybe now you can have the life you wanted without me getting in the way. All my love, Mom." P.S. I've left instructions that my ashes should be scattered in the rose garden where your father proposed to me. I know you don't remember it, but it was the happiest day of my life until you girls were born. Sarah read the note 3 times, feeling a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. Guilt, yes, but also anger at the manipulation embedded in every line. Even in what was meant to be her final communication, Margaret had managed to make her potential death Sarah's fault, while simultaneously painting herself as the loving, sacrificial mother who only wanted her daughter's happiness.
She planned this, Sarah said finally, her voice hollow. What do you mean she planned this? Lisa's voice was sharp with disbelief. Look at the timing, Lisa. She took the pills right after Aunt Helen said she was going to check on her. She knew Helen would find her. She knew she'd be saved. Sarah set down the note with trembling hands. And look at this note. It's not the rambling, desperate writing of someone in crisis. It's calculated. It's designed to maximize guilt while making her look like the victim. Sarah, how can you say that? She almost died. Did she? Or did she take just enough pills to make a statement while ensuring she'd be found in time? Sarah stood up, beginning to pace now herself. Lisa, think about it. When has Mom ever done anything without considering how it would affect other people's perception of her? When has she ever made a gesture that wasn't designed to get a specific response? Lisa stared at her sister as if she had never seen her before. I can't believe you're saying this. Our mother tried to kill herself because you cut her off, and you're accusing her of manipulation? I'm saying that our mother has spent our entire lives using emotional crisis to control our behavior, and this is just the most extreme version of that pattern. She didn't try to kill herself because I cut her off, Lisa. I asked for 1 week of space. 1 week. And instead of respecting that boundary, she escalated to the point of a suicide attempt. But the note is a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. She blames me for hating her, which I never said. She claims I cut her out of my life, which I didn't do. She paints herself as the loving mother who only wanted my happiness, while implying that her death would be the ultimate proof of my cruelty. Sarah felt something cold and clear settling in her chest. Lisa, normal people don't respond to a request for space with a suicide attempt. Lisa sank into a chair, her face crumpling. So what are you saying? That we should just ignore this? That we should let her feel like we don't care? I'm saying that we should stop letting her emotional instability dictate our choices. I'm saying that we should recognize that this isn't about love or family loyalty. It's about control. But what if you're wrong? What if she really is just a lonely, heartbroken mother who doesn't know how to deal with her daughter pulling away? Sarah looked at her sister, seeing the same desperate hope in Lisa's eyes that had lived in her own for decades. The hope that maybe this time would be different, that maybe Margaret's love was really as pure and selfless as she claimed to be. Then she needs professional help, not our continued enabling of her destructive behavior, Sarah said gently. Lisa, when was the last time Mom took responsibility for her own actions? When was the last time she apologized for hurting us instead of explaining why we should understand and forgive her? Lisa opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. She could see her sister cycling through memories, searching for examples of maternal accountability that simply didn't exist. She's in the hospital, Lisa. She's alone and scared, and she needs her family.
No, she's in the hospital because she chose to swallow a bottle of pills instead of respecting her daughter's request for space. And the fact that we're even having this conversation, the fact that we're debating whether or not to rush to her bedside after she tried to manipulate us with a suicide attempt, proves exactly how dysfunctional this family really is. Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Presbyterian Hospital. This is probably her, Sarah said, showing Lisa the screen. You have to answer it. No, I don't. Sarah let the call go to voicemail, feeling simultaneously terrified and liberated by the choice. 5 minutes later, the hospital called again. This time, Sarah answered. Ms. Chen Martinez? This is Dr. Williams at Presbyterian Hospital. Your mother is asking to see you. She's stable now, but she's quite distressed about your absence. Doctor, I need to ask you something, Sarah said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. In your professional opinion, was my mother's overdose a serious suicide attempt,
Or was it what you might call a cry for help? There was a pause. Ms. Chen Martinez, that's a complex question, and I'm not sure it's appropriate for me to. Doctor, my mother has a history of using medical emergencies to manipulate family dynamics. I need to know if this was a genuine attempt to end her life, or if it was a calculated gesture designed to elicit a specific response. Another pause, longer this time. When Dr. Williams spoke again, his voice was more careful, more clinical. The amount of medication your mother ingested would not have been fatal, especially given that she was found relatively quickly. Her stomach was pumped as a precaution, but she was never in real danger. However, I want to be clear that any overdose should be taken seriously, regardless of intent. Thank you for your honesty. Will you be coming to visit her? Sarah looked at Lisa, who was watching her with a mixture of horror and fascination, as if she was witnessing her sister transform into someone completely unrecognizable. Not today, Sarah said, but I'll make sure she has the professional support she needs. After she hung up, Lisa stared at her in silence for a long moment. I don't know who you are anymore, Lisa said finally. I'm your sister who's finally stopped setting herself on fire to keep other people warm. And Lisa, if you're honest with yourself, you'll admit that you've been waiting for someone to be brave enough to say what we've all been thinking for years. Lisa left without another word, but Sarah could see something shifting in her sister's expression, a crack in the foundation of assumptions that had governed their family for decades. That evening, Sarah and David sat on their couch with Chinese takeout and a bottle of wine, processing the day's events. How do you feel? David asked gently. Sarah considered the question seriously. Terrible and relieved at the same time. Like I'm grieving the mother I always wanted, while finally accepting the mother I actually have. And what kind of mother is that? The kind who would rather swallow pills than respect her daughter's boundaries. The kind who would use a suicide attempt as a weapon in a family argument. Sarah took a sip of wine, tasting the bitter truth of her own words. The kind who taught me that love means sacrificing yourself for other people's comfort, and then spent 34 years expecting me to sacrifice myself for hers.
David reached over and took her hand. I'm proud of you. For what? For finally seeing what was probably obvious to everyone else? For choosing yourself. For choosing us. For refusing to let her emotional terrorism dictate your life anymore. They sat in silence for a while, watching the city lights flicker on outside their window. Sarah thought about Margaret lying in a hospital bed, probably crafting her next move in this elaborate chess game of family dysfunction. She thought about Lisa, driving home with her worldview cracked open like an egg. She thought about Meredith, in Portland, living her quiet life free from the tentacles of Margaret's need. David, what if I'm wrong? What if she really is just a lonely, scared woman who doesn't know how to express her love in healthy ways? David squeezed her hand. Then she needs professional help to learn how, and you need professional help to heal from the damage her love has caused. Either way, the answer isn't for you to keep sacrificing your mental health and your marriage to manage her emotions. Sarah nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle in her bones. Tomorrow there would be more phone calls, more pressure from family members, more guilt and manipulation and emotional chaos. But tonight, for the first time in her adult life, she was choosing her own peace over her mother's comfort. It felt like the most radical act imaginable. Sarah Chen Martinez had spent 34 years believing that love meant sacrifice. In the sterile comfort of Dr. Rivera's therapy office, she was about to discover that everything she thought she knew about family relationships was built on a foundation of manipulation disguised as affection. It started with a simple request for space. After years of managing her mother Margaret's emotional crises, fielding daily phone calls filled with complaints and demands for attention, Sarah had finally asked for a brief break
to focus on her struggling marriage with David. What should have been a reasonable boundary became the catalyst for a family explosion that would change everything. Margaret's response was swift and devastating, a suicide attempt that landed her in the hospital and sent Sarah spiraling into guilt and self-doubt. Was she really so cruel that asking for space had driven her mother to try to take her own life? The familiar weight of responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders like a well-worn coat. But this time, something was different. Instead of immediately rushing to fix the crisis, Sarah found herself in Dr. Rivera's office, finally ready to examine the patterns that had governed her life for decades. Dr. Rivera's office became Sarah's sanctuary, a place where she could safely explore the toxic dynamics that had shaped her understanding of love and family. Through careful questioning and gentle guidance, the therapist helped Sarah see what she'd been too close to recognize. Her role as the emotional caretaker wasn't love. It was a learned response to manipulation. "What was my role?" Sarah asked during one pivotal session. "The emotional caretaker, the fixer, the one who absorbs everyone else's distress and takes responsibility for managing it." The words hit Sarah like a revelation. For the first time, she began to understand that her exhausting sense of responsibility for everyone else's feelings wasn't a sign of her loving nature, it was a symptom of a dysfunctional family system. The breakthrough came when Dr. Rivera introduced a word Sarah had been reluctant to accept: abuse. "Your mother may not consciously intend to be abusive," Dr. Rivera explained, "but the pattern of behavior, using emotional crisis to control your choices, threatening harm to herself when you set boundaries, making you responsible for her emotional well-being, that pattern has the same impact as intentional abuse."
The foundation of Sarah's worldview crumbled. If Margaret's behavior was abusive, then everything Sarah had understood about their relationship was wrong. All those years of guilt, self-sacrifice, and believing she owed her mother unlimited access to her time and emotional energy, it had all been based on a lie. Armed with new understanding, Sarah made a decision that terrified her. She would visit Margaret in the hospital, but not to apologize or resume her role as emotional caretaker. She was going to set boundaries and see how her mother responded. The conversation was brutal and illuminating. When Sarah tried to explain that using suicide threats to manipulate family members wasn't acceptable, Margaret's mask slipped completely. The loving, fragile mother Sarah had always known revealed herself to be someone capable of cold fury and cruel words. "You ungrateful little bitch," Margaret spat when Sarah refused to back down. "After everything I've done for you, after all the sacrifices I've made, you have the audacity to sit there and tell me that loving you made you sick?" In that moment, Sarah saw her mother clearly for the first time, not as the victim of circumstances she'd always believed, but as someone who used love as a weapon, an emotional crisis as a tool of control. The revelation was devastating and liberating simultaneously. Sarah's decision to maintain boundaries came with a price. Margaret's response escalated beyond emotional manipulation to outright harassment. She called Sarah's workplace with lies about her daughter's mental state, contacted David's photography clients with false stories of abuse, and even showed up at their home in the middle of the night, creating such a disturbance that neighbors called police. Each escalation made Sarah's choice clearer. This wasn't a woman struggling to adapt to new boundaries. This was someone who would rather destroy her daughter's life than accept that she couldn't control it. Eventually, Sarah was forced to obtain a restraining order, a legal barrier that felt both necessary and heartbreaking. The family fractured along predictable lines. Some relatives accused Sarah of cruelty, unable to see past Margaret's performance of victimhood. But others began to recognize the patterns they'd long ignored or minimized. One of the most profound healing experiences came through Sarah's reconnection with her estranged sister, Meredith. For years, Sarah had judged her harshly for cutting contact with Margaret, seeing her as cruel and ungrateful. Now, with new perspective, Sarah reached out to apologize. "I wanted to apologize for judging you, for thinking you were cruel, for cutting off contact with Mom, for not understanding why you had to leave." Meredith's response was filled with relief and validation. She'd been waiting years for her sisters to see what she'd recognized in college, that their family dynamics were deeply unhealthy, and that maintaining distance wasn't cruelty, but self-preservation. Meredith explained, "I tried to warn you, but you weren't ready to hear it. You were so deep in the system that you couldn't see it from the outside." Their younger sister, Lisa, eventually followed a similar path, recognizing Margaret's manipulation when she tried to recruit Lisa as an ally against Sarah. The three sisters began building relationships based on mutual support rather than shared trauma management. The changes in Sarah's life went beyond her relationship with Margaret. Without the constant drain of managing her mother's emotions, Sarah discovered energy and interests she'd forgotten she possessed. Her marriage with David deepened as they got to know each other without the shadow of family dysfunction.
"I have opinions about things," Sarah marveled to Dr. Rivera during one session. "Last week, David asked me what I wanted for dinner, and I said Thai food without automatically asking what he preferred first. It's such a small thing, but it felt revolutionary." Sarah began taking photography classes, expressing opinions in her book club, and finding creative solutions at work instead of just trying to satisfy everyone's demands. She was discovering who she was when she wasn't constantly trying to make everyone else happy. The story unfolds over decades, showing that healing from family dysfunction isn't a quick fix, but a lifelong process. Sarah and David eventually had a daughter, Emma, whom they raised with intentional attention to boundaries, consent, and emotional autonomy. Emma grew up knowing that her feelings mattered, that she didn't have to earn love through self-sacrifice, and that healthy love respected rather than controlled. Margaret's life took its own trajectory. Forced for the first time to develop relationships that didn't depend on her daughter's emotional labor, she slowly began building a social life in her senior living community. Though she never fully changed, she learned to manage her manipulation more subtly and eventually respected the boundaries her daughters had set. 15 years after the estrangement began, Margaret suffered a stroke. Sarah chose to visit her, not seeking reconciliation, but hoping for closure. The conversation was remarkable for what it didn't contain. No manipulation, no demands, no attempts to rewrite history. "I'm sorry," Margaret said simply. "I didn't understand then what I was doing to you girls. I thought love meant never letting go." It wasn't the tearful reunion that movies might script, but something more valuable. Two adults having an honest conversation about their shared history without trying to change the past or each other. Margaret died 6 months later, and Sarah grieved not for the relationship they'd lost, but for the relationship they'd never been able to have. The story concludes 20 years later, with Sarah watching her granddaughter Sophia play with blocks, building elaborate structures with the confidence of someone who'd never been told her ideas were too big or ambitious. 3 generations of women played together, Sophia building, Emma consulting, Sarah encouraging, representing a quiet revolution disguised as an ordinary family gathering. Emma, now an environmental scientist, expressed interest in writing about their family's journey. She keeps meeting people who don't realize that what they're experiencing isn't normal or healthy. The story had come full circle, from dysfunction to healing to helping others find their own path forward. Sarah's story illustrates several crucial truths about family dysfunction and recovery. Love without respect isn't healthy love. True love wants the other person to thrive, even when their choices don't serve your immediate desires. Love that demands self-sacrifice to maintain someone else's comfort is possession disguised as affection. Setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary for healthy relationships. Many people, especially those raised in dysfunctional families,
are taught that saying no or asking for space is selfish. In reality, boundaries allow relationships to flourish by establishing mutual respect. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved. Sarah spent decades trying to manage her mother's emotions and fix her problems, but lasting change can only come from within. The most loving thing you can do for someone is sometimes to stop enabling their destructive patterns.
Healing is possible, but it requires conscious effort. Breaking generational patterns of dysfunction doesn't happen automatically. It requires therapy, self-reflection, and the courage to make difficult choices, even when others disapprove. The guilt fades, but it takes time. People who set boundaries with toxic family members often struggle with guilt, wondering if they could have tried harder or been more patient. Sarah's story shows that while these feelings are normal, they eventually give way to peace and self-respect. Cutting contact isn't the only option, but sometimes it's necessary. While some relationships can be salvaged with firm boundaries, others require complete separation for healing to occur. Neither choice is right or wrong. It depends on the specific situation and the willingness of all parties to change. In a culture that often prioritizes family loyalty over individual well-being, Sarah's story offers a different narrative. It shows that it's possible to love family members while also protecting yourself from their harmful behavior. It demonstrates that children aren't responsible for their parents' emotional well-being and that healthy families support each member's growth rather than demanding conformity or self-sacrifice. For those currently struggling with similar dynamics, Sarah's journey offers hope. Change is possible. Healing is possible. It's difficult, often lonely, and requires tremendous courage, but it can be done. The cycles of dysfunction that seem so entrenched can be broken, creating space for authentic love and genuine connection to flourish. The story also highlights the importance of professional help. Dr. Rivera's guidance was crucial in helping Sarah recognize the dynamics she'd been too close to see. Therapy provided the tools and perspective necessary for Sarah to make healthy choices even when they felt terrifying. Perhaps most importantly, the story shows that breaking free from family dysfunction isn't just about individual healing. It's about creating a better future for the next generation. Emma grew up knowing that love didn't require self-sacrifice, that her opinions mattered, and that healthy relationships respected boundaries. Sophia will inherit this legacy of emotional health, breaking a cycle that had persisted for generations. For those currently struggling with similar dynamics, Sarah's journey offers hope. Change is possible. Healing is possible. It's difficult, often lonely, and requires tremendous courage, but it can be done. The cycles of dysfunction that seem so entrenched can be broken, creating space for authentic love and genuine connection to flourish. The story also highlights the importance of professional help. Dr. Rivera's guidance was crucial in helping Sarah recognize the dynamics she'd been too close to see. Therapy provided the tools and perspective necessary for Sarah to make healthy choices even when they felt terrifying. Perhaps most importantly, the story shows that breaking free from family dysfunction isn't just about individual healing. It's about creating a better future for the next generation. Emma grew up knowing that love didn't require self-sacrifice, that her opinions mattered, and that healthy relationships respected boundaries. Sophia will inherit this legacy of emotional health, breaking a cycle that had persisted for generations. Thank you for taking this journey with us through Sarah's story of healing and transformation. If this narrative spoke to you, helped you feel less alone, or provided insights for your own healing journey, please consider subscribing to stay connected with more stories of hope, healing, and the courage to choose yourself. Subscribe to receive more powerful stories about breaking free from toxic patterns, building healthy relationships, and creating the life you deserve. Your healing matters, your boundaries are valid, and your story, whatever it may be, deserves to have a hopeful ending. Hit that subscribe button and join our community of people committed to choosing health over habit, authenticity over approval, and growth over comfort. Together, we're proving that change is possible, one brave choice at a time. The wine glass shattered against the kitchen wall, burgundy liquid streaming down the cream-colored paint like tears of blood. Sarah Chen Martinez stood frozen in her bathrobe, Her husband David's face contorted with a fury she'd never seen before, not in their 8 years of marriage. The fragments caught the morning light, filtering through their bay window, each shard reflecting a different angle of the life that was crumbling around them. "You promised me." David's voice cracked, his usually gentle tenor now raw with betrayal. "You swore you'd tell her we wouldn't be coming to Christmas anymore. You swore you'd set boundaries this time." Sarah's hands trembled as she reached for the paper towels, her wedding ring catching on the perforated edge. The simple platinum band that once symbolized their unity now felt like a shackle, weighing down her finger with the gravity of broken promises. "I tried, David. I really tried, but she what? She guilt-tripped you? She cried? She told you about her heart condition again?" David ran his fingers through his dark hair, the gesture she'd once found endearing, now speaking only of exhaustion. "Sarah, she's been using that same playbook for 32 years. When are you going to see it?" The kitchen fell silent except for the persistent drip of wine finding its way to the hardwood floor below. Sarah knelt carefully, avoiding the larger shards, her mind racing back to the phone call 3 hours earlier. Her mother's voice had been syrupy sweet at first, congratulating Sarah on the promotion at the architectural firm, asking about David's latest photography exhibition. Then, as always, the conversation had turned. "Darling, I've been thinking," Margaret Chen had said, her tone shifting to that familiar combination of vulnerability and manipulation that Sarah had learned to recognize but never learned to resist. "Christmas is only 6 weeks away, and I know last year was difficult, but I've changed, sweetheart. I've been seeing a therapist." Sarah had felt her stomach clench, the same physical response she'd had since childhood whenever her mother's voice took on that particular cadence. "Mom, we talked about this. David and I need space from your own mother?" Margaret's voice had turned sharp, then quickly softened again. "Sarah, I'm 67 years old. My heart isn't what it used to be. Dr. Peterson says the stress of our estrangement is affecting my blood pressure. How many Christmases do you think I have left?" Now, crouched on her kitchen floor, picking up pieces of broken glass, Sarah could still hear her mother's words echoing. She'd caved, of course. She'd told Margaret they would come for Christmas Eve dinner, that they'd try to make things work. She'd hung up the phone and immediately called David at his studio, her voice bright with false optimism as she explained how this time would be different. David hadn't even responded at first. She had heard him breathing on the other end of the line, the sound of his equipment being carefully set down. When he finally spoke, his voice had been eerily calm. "I'll be home in 20 minutes. We need to talk." "David, please," Sarah whispered, now on her knees, a small cut on her palm beginning to bleed from where she'd gripped a shard too tightly. "David, I know I messed up, but maybe if we just what?" David's voice broke completely now, and Sarah looked up to see tears streaming down his face. "Sarah, I can't do this anymore. I can't watch her destroy you, and I can't pretend that it's not destroying us." The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of unspoken truths. Sarah's best friend Rachel had warned her about this moment 3 months ago when David had first suggested couples therapy. "Honey, you can't save your marriage and your mother's ego at the same time," Rachel had said over coffee, her voice gentle but firm. "One of them has to give." Sarah had defended her mother then, explaining how Margaret had raised her alone after Sarah's father died when she was 7, how she had sacrificed so much, how she just wanted to feel loved and included. Rachel had listened patiently, stirring her latte with mechanical precision, before asking the question that had haunted Sarah ever since. "But what has she sacrificed for you?"
The kitchen clock ticked toward 9:30, and Sarah could hear their neighbor, Mrs. Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, starting her car for her Tuesday morning grocery run. Life continued around them, mundane and steady, while their marriage cracked open like an egg against concrete.
She wasn't always like this, Sarah said quietly, more to herself than to David. She thought about the mother of her early childhood, the woman who had read her bedtime stories and made elaborate Halloween costumes from scraps of fabric. But even those memories felt tainted now, viewed through the lens of adult understanding. Had Margaret's love always come with conditions? Had her affection always required Sarah to be smaller, quieter, more accommodating? David sat heavily in one of their dining chairs, his head in his hands. "Tell me about the wedding again," he said, his voice muffled. Sarah's chest tightened. She knew which moment he meant. 3 years into their marriage, they had finally decided to have a small ceremony to celebrate with family, having eloped to Vegas in a moment of romantic spontaneity. Margaret had arrived 2 hours late to the intimate backyard gathering, claiming car trouble, and had spent the evening making subtle digs about the rushed nature of their relationship and the unconventional choice to have the ceremony at their home instead of a proper venue. But the real damage had come later, during the toasts. Margaret had stood up, uninvited, and delivered a speech that began warmly but gradually shifted into a monologue about how Sarah had always been impulsive and how Margaret hoped David would help her make better decisions. She'd shared embarrassing childhood stories, undermined Sarah's independence, and managed to make herself the center of attention while appearing to celebrate their union. Sarah had smiled through it all, trained by years of practice to absorb her mother's behavior and smooth over the rough edges for everyone else's comfort. But she'd seen David's face that night, had watched him truly understand for the first time what she'd been trying to explain about her family dynamics. "She ruined it," David said now, lifting his head to look at her. "She took our wedding day and made it about her pain, her needs, her story. And you let her." "I didn't know how to stop her," Sarah whispered. "But you knew she was doing it." David's voice wasn't accusatory, just tired. "You knew, and you chose to protect her feelings over mine, over ours." The truth of his words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had known. In the moment, as Margaret's speech grew more inappropriate, Sarah had felt the familiar choice presenting itself: confront her mother and deal with the inevitable explosion of tears and accusations of betrayal, or absorb the damage and try to minimize it for everyone else's comfort. She'd chosen as she always chose. "Your sister called me yesterday," David said suddenly. Sarah's head snapped up. "Lisa called you?" "She's worried about you, about us." David leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "She told me about Christmas 2019. Sarah's stomach dropped. Christmas 2019 was the year she had a panic attack in her mother's bathroom, hyperventilating so badly that Lisa had to drive her home. Margaret had spent the following week calling Sarah daily, alternating between concern and accusations that Sarah was being dramatic and trying to hurt the family. "What did Lisa say?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "She said Mom called her last week crying about how you were abandoning her for David and how I was turning you against your own family. She asked Lisa to talk to you, to make you see reason. And then she said something that really got to me."
Sarah waited, her heart hammering against her ribs. "She said she loves you too much to watch you destroy your life trying to fix someone who doesn't want to be fixed. She said she'd already lost one sister to Mom's manipulation and she wasn't going to lose another." The reference to their estranged older sister Meredith hung in the air between them. Meredith had cut contact with the family 5 years earlier, moving across the country and changing her phone number after a particularly vicious fight with Margaret over Meredith's decision to divorce her husband. Margaret still spoke about Meredith's betrayal as if it had happened yesterday, often using it as an example of how ungrateful children could break their mother's heart. Sarah had always seen Meredith's choice as extreme, even cruel.
Now, sitting in her kitchen, surrounded by broken glass and the remnants of her marriage, she wondered if Meredith had simply been braver than she was. "I don't know how to be different," Sarah admitted, the words scraping against her throat. "I don't know how to be the daughter who sets boundaries and the wife who protects her marriage. I feel like I'm being torn in half." David stood up slowly, and for a moment Sarah thought he might come to her, might pull her into his arms the way he had during the early days of their relationship when the world felt conquerable. Instead, he walked to the counter where his keys lay next to the coffee maker. "I'm going to stay at Marcus's for a while. I need to think." "David, please!" Sarah scrambled to her feet, ignoring the sharp bite of glass through her socks. "I love you, Sarah. I've loved you since the day we met at that terrible gallery opening where the artist served wine in mason jars." His smile was sad, distant. "But I can't love you enough to save you from this. You have to want to save yourself." The front door closed with a soft click, and Sarah was along with the silence and the broken glass. She stood in her kitchen, the morning light now harsh and unforgiving, and realized that she'd been having the same fight with David in various forms for years. The details changed. Sometimes it was about holiday plans, sometimes about Margaret's inappropriate comments about their childlessness, sometimes about the way Margaret called during their date nights, and Sarah always answered. But the core issue remained the same. She was 34 years old, and she still couldn't say no to her mother. Sarah walked carefully to the living room and sank onto their gray sectional sofa, the one they'd picked out together on a happy Saturday morning 2 years ago. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found Dr. Amanda Rivera, the therapist Rachel had recommended months earlier. Sarah had scheduled an appointment twice before, canceling both times when Margaret had called with some crisis that required immediate attention. This time, she didn't hesitate. She dialed the number and left a voicemail asking for the earliest available appointment, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. As she hung up, her phone immediately buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Darling, I forgot to mention, I invited Aunt Helen and Uncle Bob to Christmas dinner too. I hope that's all right. I know David doesn't care for Uncle Bob's political views, but family is family, right? Love you." Sarah stared at the message, feeling something shift inside her chest. It wasn't anger, exactly, or even frustration. It was something colder, more final. Recognition. Her mother had waited exactly 3 hours after their phone conversation to add more complications, more pressure, more reasons why Sarah couldn't possibly disappoint the family now. It was a pattern so predictable that Sarah could have set her watch by it. For the first time in her adult life, Sarah didn't respond to her mother's text immediately. Instead, she set the phone aside and went to clean up the broken glass, each shard catching the light like tiny mirrors, reflecting all the moments she'd chosen her mother's comfort over her own truth. The kitchen felt different now. Quieter, but also somehow larger, as if David's absence had created space for something new to grow. Sarah didn't know yet what that something might be, but as she swept up the last fragments of the wine glass, she found herself wondering what it would feel like to choose differently. Outside, Mrs. Chen returned from her grocery run, the slam of her car door marking the passage of another ordinary Tuesday morning in an ordinary suburban neighborhood where marriages ended not with explosions, but with the accumulation of 1,000 small betrayals, each one justified by love. The therapist's office smelled like lavender and leather, a combination that should have been soothing but instead made Sarah's skin crawl with anxiety. Dr. Amanda Rivera sat across from her in a chair that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly car payment, her expression carefully neutral as Sarah recounted the morning David had left. "You mentioned that your mother wasn't always like this," Dr. Rivera said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Sarah couldn't quite place. "Can you tell me more about that?"
Sarah shifted uncomfortably, her hands fidgeting with the tissue she'd been shredding for the past 10 minutes. 3 days had passed since the wine glass incident. 3 days of sleeping alone in a bed that felt cavernous without David's warmth. He'd called twice, brief conversations about logistics. He needed his good camera lens. Could she put his mail in a box? Was she okay? That had felt more like negotiations between strangers than conversations between spouses. When I was little, maybe 7 or 8, she used to make these elaborate treasure hunts for me. She'd hide clues all around the house, and at the end there would be some small prize, a new book or a pack of stickers. She'd spend hours setting them up. Dr. Rivera nodded encouragingly. That sounds lovely. What changed? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to pinpoint the exact moment when her mother's love had begun to feel conditional, transactional. I think it was gradual. After Dad died, she was so sad all the time. I started feeling like it was my job to make her happy again. The treasure hunt stopped, and instead she'd ask me to help her with grown-up things. Managing the checkbook, calling to argue with the insurance company, being her emotional support when she couldn't sleep at night. How old were you when these responsibilities started? 8? Maybe 9? Sarah opened her eyes, meeting Dr. Rivera's gaze for the first time since she'd sat down. I was good at it. I liked feeling needed, important. I thought I was helping. And your sisters, Lisa and Meredith? Sarah's jaw tightened. Lisa was only 5 when Dad died, so she was too young. And Meredith... Sarah paused, remembering her older sister's increasing absence from family dinners, her early graduation from high school, her quick escape to college on the opposite coast. I think she saw what was happening and got out. But you stayed. I stayed. The words felt heavy in Sarah's mouth. I got really good at reading Mom's moods, anticipating what she needed, smoothing things over when she got upset. It became like a game. How quickly could I fix whatever was wrong? Dr. Rivera leaned forward slightly. Sarah, what you're describing sounds like parentification, when a child is given adult responsibilities and becomes responsible for their parents' emotional well-being. It's a form of childhood trauma. The word trauma hit Sarah like a slap. She'd heard it before, of course, had seen it thrown around on social media and in self-help books, but she'd never applied it to her own life. Trauma was for people who'd been abused, neglected, hurt in obvious ways. Trauma wasn't for girls whose mothers loved them too much. It wasn't traumatic, Sarah said quickly. Mom never hit me, never yelled at me. She was just sad and lonely. I was helping.
Helping at the cost of your own childhood, your own development. Dr. Rivera's voice was gentle but firm. Sarah, when a child becomes responsible for managing an adult's emotions, it disrupts their natural development. They learn to prioritize others' needs over their own, to the point where they may not even know what their own needs are. Sarah felt something twist in her chest, a familiar panic that rose whenever she was confronted with ideas that challenged her fundamental understanding of her family. But that's just being a good daughter, isn't it? Taking care of your family? There's a difference between age-appropriate helpfulness and being made responsible for an adult's emotional stability. Dr. Rivera pulled out a small notebook and scribbled something quickly. Can you tell me about a time in your childhood when you felt like you could just be a kid? The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah realized with growing horror that she couldn't immediately think of an answer. Her childhood memories were all filtered through the lens of her mother's needs. The time she'd chosen to stay home from sleepovers because Margaret seemed sad, the way she'd learned to phrase her own problems to minimize them, so they wouldn't add to her mother's stress, the careful dance of managing Margaret's moods while still trying to excel at school and maintain friendships. I was happy, Sarah insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. I had friends, I got good grades, I was in the school play my senior year. Tell me about the school play. Sarah's stomach clenched as the memory surfaced. She'd been cast as Emily in Our Town, a role she'd wanted desperately. Margaret had been supportive at first, even attending some rehearsals. But as opening night approached, Margaret's health anxiety had flared up,
Real or manufactured, Sarah had never been sure. The night of the performance, Margaret had called Sarah 2 hours before curtain, sobbing about chest pains and asking Sarah to come home. Sarah almost left. She'd stood in the school bathroom still in her costume, debating whether to tell the director she couldn't perform. In the end, she'd stayed, but she'd been so distracted during the performance that she'd missed 2 cues and fumbled her most important monologue. Margaret had been fine, of course. The chest pains had been anxiety, nothing more. But Sarah had felt guilty for weeks afterward, as if her success on stage had somehow caused her mother's suffering. "I stayed for the play," she said quietly, "but I felt terrible about it." Dr. Rivera made another note. "Sarah, I want you to consider the possibility that your relationship with your mother has been built on an unhealthy dynamic from a very young age. This doesn't make you a bad daughter, and it doesn't make her an evil mother, but it does mean that the patterns you learned as a child are now affecting your adult relationships." I thought about David, about the way he'd looked at me that morning in the kitchen. I thought about the countless times I'd canceled plans with friends because Margaret needed something. The way I'd learned to phrase conversations with my mother like negotiations, always trying to find the solution that would cause the least emotional upheaval. "She'll say I'm abandoning her," she whispered. "If I try to change things, she'll say I don't love her anymore." "And how will that feel?" "Terrible," the answer came without hesitation. "Like I'm the worst daughter in the world." "But how do you feel now?" Sarah looked around the office, taking in the carefully chosen artwork, the tissues strategically placed within reach, the way the afternoon light filtered through blinds that were positioned to create warmth without glare. Everything in this room was designed to help people feel safe enough to fall apart. "Empty," she admitted. "I feel empty, like I don't even know who I am when I'm not trying to make someone else happy."
The confession hung in the air between them, and Sarah felt simultaneously relieved and terrified to have spoken it aloud. She thought about her daily routine, the way she structured her life around everyone else's needs, checking in on Margaret multiple times a day, adjusting her schedule to accommodate David's preferences, even choosing restaurants based on what she thought her companions would enjoy, rather than what she actually wanted. "When was the last time you did something purely because you wanted to do it?" Dr. Rivera asked. Sarah opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. The question should have been simple, but she found herself cycling through recent memories, trying to identify moments of genuine personal desire, rather than calculated choices designed to please others. "I like my job," she said finally. "I chose architecture because I love it." "Tell me about that choice." Sarah's face brightened slightly. "I was good at math and art, but I didn't want to be a starving artist. Architecture felt like the perfect compromise. Creative, but practical. I remember the moment I decided, actually. I was 16 and we were visiting colleges. Mom wanted me to consider pre-med because it was stable and respectable. But we walked past this building on one campus that had these incredible clean lines and this way of using natural light that just took my breath away." "How did your mother react when you told her you wanted to study architecture instead of medicine?" The brightness faded from Sarah's expression. "She cried. She said she'd always dreamed of having a daughter who was a doctor, that it would make Dad proud. She talked about how hard it would be for me to find work, how unstable the field was. She worried I wasn't being realistic about my limitations." "But you stuck with it." "I did. I felt a flicker of something that might have been pride. It was one of the few times I really fought her on something. I think it worked because I could frame it as practical. I could show her salary statistics, job growth projections. I made spreadsheets." Dr. Rivera smiled slightly. "You learned to present your desires in a way that addressed her concerns." "I guess so." Sarah paused, considering this. "I do that a lot, actually. Figure out what someone's worried about and then address those worries first before I ask for what I want. That's an exhausting way to live.
The simple observation hit Sarah with unexpected force. It was exhausting. She was constantly calculating, constantly managing, constantly performing emotional labor to smooth the path for her own needs. No wonder she felt empty. She'd been so focused on managing everyone else's feelings that she'd lost touch with her own. David used to say I was the most considerate person he'd ever met, Sarah said softly. I thought it was a compliment. And now? Now I think he was trying to tell me something else, that I was disappearing. He used to ask me what I wanted for dinner, and I'd always say, whatever you want. He'd ask what movie I wanted to watch, and I'd defer to him. At first, he thought I was just being nice, but after a while it became a problem. He said it was like being married to a ghost, someone who was physically present but had no opinions, no preferences, no solid ground to stand on. Sarah wiped her eyes with the tissue. Dr. Rivera leaned back in her chair, studying Sarah with compassionate eyes. Sarah, I want to ask you something that might be difficult. When you think about setting boundaries,